So this is quite a challenge for me to try to address the idea of particular points in time, and I'm going to have the panelists address this as well. Actually, I'm mic'd, so I'm going to just sit down. I think one of the observations about futurism is that it used to be quite a thriving field. My father subscribed me to the Futurist magazine when I was 13 or something, and there continue to be conferences, the World Futurist Association, and people who have that title. But it seems like, having been in this field for a while, that futurism's bedeviled by problems of a recognition of the complexity of the world that makes linear predictions of things really difficult. And we saw that with the collapse of the Soviet Union. We saw that with the sudden breakthrough of Dolly the sheep and cloning, and now with CRISPR. We see it with the fact that it was so difficult for anyone to predict the microprocessor revolution. You know, science fiction of the 1950s imagined that computers would be the size of this room. And now with ISIS, I mean, who among us would have predicted that a medieval caliphate would be rising in the Middle East? There are still some among us who do futurist predictions of a relatively linear sort. Ray Kurzweil is an example. He at least thinks that the next 30 years up to 2045 are pretty predictable. And then after that, all bets are off because the rapture occurs. And there are people like Martin Rees who have predicted that at least 50% likelihood that we'll whack ourselves one way or another in the next century. So it's not exactly linear prediction, but it's one kind of prediction. So the first question that I want to pose to our panelists, who are Melanie Swan. You can see their bios up there. This is Melanie, this is David, and this is Seth. And they all are eminently qualified to address this question. But the first question I want to address is, how do you think about predictability of the future? And for me as a sociologist, the question of kind of what are the fundamental drivers and determinants? You know, in sociology, we talk about technological determinism, but there's also demographic determinism, there's climate determinism, there's all other kinds of drivers that I think create some kind of context for saying most likely scenarios for some kinds of things happening over the course of the next 30 years. So that's the first question. How do you think about those drivers of change?
So when I consider drivers of change and what may be happening on a decadal basis in the next 30 years and so forth, I think to me really I look at technology, emerging science breakthroughs as one key factor, and then also mentality shifts, a social factor. And so if I'm setting up a quadrants of what might be future scenarios of the world without having to try to do a point prediction, there can be scenarios where there's more openness in social systems or more closeness in social systems. And then on the other axis, what's happening in the state of the world? Is it a more open world with progress and advance in climate change, in technology, or are we heading more towards a more circumscribed, closed down kind of world? So I look at technology and social maturity as the two axes, and then within tech, for example, being optimistic currently about starting to have more kinds of planetary class technologies at our disposal to really marshal efforts across this planet and others in regard to nanotech, synthetic biology, and AI. And these key planetary level tech changes is something I see in the next as quite potential scenarios on a 30-year basis. And then on the social side, shifts in mentality that allow us to transition from the labor economy to the automation economy and actualization economy, rethinking our personal relationships with authority on an economic, political, and ethical basis.
So I work for a magazine called Scientific American, the oldest continuously published magazine in the US since 1845. That means we've been wrong about a lot of things, starting with our first cover, which was of a high-speed train. It went 40 miles per hour, and our take was, why would anybody need to go that fast? Mm-hmm. We were also against the telephone. frivolous. Anyway, so you should take this all with a grain of salt. I think the most instructive way to think about this is to go back to 1915 and try to imagine what they would have thought about 1945. So they were in the midst of the war to end all wars. So war would obviously be over in 1945. Mm-hmm. Not so much. They had a huge pandemic just a few years down the road, killed millions of people. They were not expecting that. Most of the things that we're thinking about right now are probably not going to play out in that linear fashion that you're describing. There are going to be these black swans that disrupt the whole shebang. Now, whether that's a limited nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan or runaway global warming, I don't know, but one of those things is likely to occur.
Mm-hmm.
So we work on global catastrophic risks. These are risks of events that could basically destroy the entirety of global human civilization. And for us, the bottom line is not so much the risk itself, but the opportunities, the actions that we can all take to reduce the risk. I mean, these are kind of crucial issues for humanity. If we get these wrong, then we're no longer around to enjoy anything else that we might be working on. And so prediction here is a tricky one because the future of these risks depends so heavily on the actions that we take over the next few decades. So whether it is something like nuclear weapons is a classic example of a risk that is entirely in our hands. We're not going to get blindsided. And by our hands, I mean humanity as a whole, right? Certain people might get blindsided by something, but ultimately the risk is entirely based on human decisions. At the same time, there is a lot of value in being able to predict, or at least project, look at broad trends in geopolitical relations, in future military technologies that might make, in this case, nuclear weapons less desirable as a class of technology. And so when we're formulating policy recommendations, it's crucial for us to be developing policy for the world as it will exist when the policy will take place, as opposed to for the world that exists now. Because if you do it for the world as it exists now, then you're just getting it wrong. You're putting things in the wrong context. And so while the risk as a whole, for the most part, does depend on human actions, it's still important for us to be able to predict or project what sorts of actions might be taking place over the next couple of decades so that we can get the policies on these issues correct.
So one of the reasons why Ray Kurzweil has this, this predictive framework is that he's an accelerationist. He thinks that technologies are on this accelerating trajectory. And I think that, for me, it's one of the things that separates the kind of futurism or public policy thinking that I do from what occurs in mainstream public policy. Most mainstream public policy doesn't accept that something like robust artificial intelligence could occur within the next 30 years. Do you consider yourself an accelerationist, and how do you think about that in terms of things like the long delayed promises of fusion energy, which fusion energy is always like 20 years ahead. It's been that way for 40 years.
And will be in 2045.
But, yeah. Okay, so accelerationism doesn't apply in that kind of a situation.
Fusion's a great example because it's been 20 or 30 years away for the last 60 or 70 years, and for all we know, it will continue to be indefinitely in the future. At the same time, if we are able to master nuclear fusion technology, it would be such a massive game changer. I mean, a clean, safe, and maybe even affordable energy source. If you worry about things like global warming, and I certainly worry a lot about global warming, then my own take is, yeah, we should still keep trying on fusion technology, even though the predictions might never come true, because they might. We just don't know. So too with something like artificial intelligence. 30 years from now, will we have this sort of AI that can do all our thinking for us, and we can, I don't know, just relax at the beach or something like that? It's really hard to say, but at the same time, it would be such a big game changer that it's worth acting now with that possibility in mind.
AI will solve fusion. So going back to my historical frame. In 1915, they were on the cusp of the Great Acceleration, right? Fossil fuels were about to unleash this runaway growth in human population, farm yields, you name it, the graph goes like this. We are at an inflection point in that acceleration, in that it could continue if we can continue to make breakthroughs in energy, which I would argue is the main driving trend of all those other trends, or it could kind of plateau. And the decisions that we're making now are what will determine that. Are we putting money into R&D for fusion? Are we spreading our bets around enough? Are we putting enough money into synthetic biology and maybe the biofuels that come out of that? Are we putting enough money into fusion research? I can't say for sure, but that's where that accelerationist path continues. If we don't do that, for sure we will have that plateau. But I would also argue that fossil fuels will be cheap in 2045 because we'll be using less of them.
Which we already see happening. Yeah.
I think in the acceleration view, the accelerationist view, the technology frontier is always 25, 40 years out there, and we're always waiting. But what's important and what might be missed is that a number of incremental improvements are occurring all of the time. And so one example, or the several examples given in artificial intelligence, are the ATM machine, fraud detection, many different kinds of AI advances that we've had, but we still our ideal of computers that are human level, have human level intelligence and consciousness is something that hasn't existed yet. And so, but also meanwhile is the slow accumulation of different changes. And so we start to see more of our reality as a math problem. So we started to see communications networks as a math problem, and then biology as a math problem. Craig Venter articulated this earlier. And now we're starting to see thinking as a math problem with the Connectome project, and economics as more so of a math problem with blockchain technology. And then perhaps politics actually as a math problem as we start to get 30 years out. So I think the way we're already shifting our understanding of semantics through deep learning algorithms is an example of incremental improvements through artificial intelligence, and that while the accelerationist bogey is still out there, numerous improvements continue to accumulate.
I would argue that one of the challenges there, though, is that demography seems like a math problem.
Use your mic, David.
Use which mic?
Well, the one that's on you.
The one that's on me that I just fixed. Okay. All right. Demography seems like a math problem. 7 billion of us going to 10 billion. But the challenges posed by 10 billion people will not be reducible to math. And so that's, we will not be able to reduce everything to binary code and get our solutions that way. I would argue it's always going to be a messy reality. I would argue that is the irreducible nature of reality.
So the WHO has population analysts who try to do population projections out to like 2080. The Social Security trustees every year release a report where they project what the economy and the demography of the United States is going to be in 2080. And I always just like boggle, how could you possibly have the hubris to try to say something like that? But, when I think about the interacting effects of things like black swan events of wars, plagues, versus the rapidly declining fertility rate, which has declined much faster than people expected, versus longevity technologies, which may come online soon and allow us all to live to be 150. Demography just seems a completely unpredictable thing at this point.
Well, yeah, but these are projections, not predictions, and it's important to distinguish between a prediction which says, okay, in 2080 the population of the world will be 9.6 billion or whatever the current best guess is. That's prediction, and predictions are almost certainly going to be wrong just because there are all of these factors that will happen between now and then that we don't know, and so we can't factor them into the prediction. A projection, though, is just taking the trends as we currently see them and seeing, okay, this is what fertility rates and death rates and so on look like right now over the last few decades. If you extrapolate that out into the future, those are projections, and you expect that they'll be wrong, but at the same time, they do tell us something meaningful about what we could expect over upcoming years.
Mm-hmm. Technological unemployment. Jim hosted a wonderful meeting here, what was it, 6 weeks ago, something like that, where we talked all day about technological unemployment, and it's still on the margins of public policy. It fits into this accelerationist perspective. Where do you guys fit? Do you think that we're going to be living a life of leisure, or at least be serfs under a future feudal structure?
I think that's the big dream, is exactly technological unemployment and the shift from the labor economy to the automation economy and the actualization economy. But absolutely, until whatever the new productive activity that used to be a job is, the productive engagement of our energies towards a goal that delivers status and contribution and growth and learning and other benefits, that is the real rethinking of the technological unemployment question to me, which is how to provide actualization opportunities to us as humans. That's probably the biggest opportunity of the future that I see, and what would make the difference in the transition to an automation economy.
Now, this is something they were definitely thinking about in 1915. John Maynard Keynes was predicting that we would be living in that life of leisure, that his grandchildren would not have to work and would just be, provided manna from machine heaven. And that didn't come to pass. And I don't think it will come to pass this time because, again, humans will push back against their technological future overlords. The professional class will rise up like the saboteurs of the past and throw a little gum in the works, slow things down, and that technological nirvana will not arrive on that schedule.
You think it's not going to arrive because we're going to fight the robots, or you think it's not going to arrive because we're going to create bullshit jobs to make everybody continue working?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, or the alternative, though, is that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, there will still be important activities that humans can do better than machines can. And I really feel like the jury's still out on whether or not that's going to end up being the case. This is something that people have been worried about since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right? That all these machines and factories and so on are going to put people out of work. And looking back at the Industrial Revolution, I think for the most part we're pretty happy that that happened. At the same time, what we're looking at right now or in upcoming decades, it could be different just because we're now getting to automate more and more high-skilled, cognitively and physically demanding, complex tasks. The list of things that only humans can do might be getting smaller and eventually might get down effectively to zero. You mentioned Keynes was thinking about this. As I understand, another older economist who was thinking about this was Karl Marx. Mm-hmm. And I think as we become more and more able to automate the economy, if it really turns out to be the case that humans can offer meaningful labor to the economy in order to make our livelihoods, this is where ideas like communism start to make a lot more sense. I mean, people already talk about the guaranteed minimum income or something like that. That's essentially a communist idea. And historically, we've seen maybe communism hasn't worked as well for economies because things can't be coordinated and produce as well as they can under a free market capitalist economy. But if the robots are taking care of all of that, then it might all just work. And furthermore, we might need something like that in order for people to have what they need to live. And only then can this dream of a life of leisure, we still lose our sense of self-worth from the labor, but at least we can relax and have fun and enjoy our lives. I think only then can that dream really come true.
Well, that puts a different kind of spin on the potential for clash of civilizations. I think when most people talk about clash of civilizations, they think about Islam, the future caliphate versus the Chinese versus Russian neo-fascism, something like that. But do you see an emergence of a future global left again? Another Comintern that could, be another contender on the stage.
I think it's already happening. I mean, with the election of Jeremy Corbyn, Bernie Sanders' run to the left in the Democratic Party, there is a resurgence in some of those ideas because of these fears But we're not there. We're not at that technological inflection point. Uh-oh, I'm breaking glasses now.
You didn't throw it at any rate.
But you know, the clash of civilizations, again, and you know, maybe I'm mildly obsessed. I would again reduce it to an energy question. ISIS doesn't exist without Saudi oil. Saudi oil isn't valuable if we're not buying it. You know, you put EVs everywhere, and we have the clash of civilizations becomes a rump issue, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Melanie, are we at the end of the American or European era? Is it the beginning of the Chinese era or something?
Yeah, I think on the political issue, clash of civilizations, as well as most issues, the futurist view is typically one of plurality or multiplicity. It's not an either or for the future. It's, now we have the radio and a music player at home. And so to me, the political question is this same way, where we have probably in the future multiple participations. So we have, as a citizen, participate in a nation state and also a micropolis. So in my local community, we are sustainable by sharing power via our Tesla power walls, through our organic greens units, through part of being a crypto citizen in the future is providing infrastructure and being part of a resilience community on some sort of local level. And that's how I think of a micropolis kind of idea. And then it rolls up into, at the same time, participation in nation states and other levels of organization. And so to me, on a longer term basis, the current nation state conflicts go away. I think Islam is the new Cold War in a lot of ways now, and that over decades will also recede and resolve.
Mm-hmm. So how much time do we have, Jim? I don't see a sign. That's a good. I haven't seen the sign. Excellent.
We're not getting yanked off the stage yet.
Yeah, we must be doing good.
Yeah.
So the singularity idea is on the table. I mean, 2045 is up there in the panel title. And I've always been I'm critical of the singularity because I think it's so laden with millennialist and apocalyptic psychocultural baggage. But as I started the talk, I think that there is a problem with futurism that our acknowledgement of theories of complexity and all the things and all the ways that we've gotten it wrong in the past means that the future is unknowable in certain ways. But it's not, I don't pin it to artificial intelligence being the thing that's suddenly going to make it all unknowable. It's just because it's so complex. But are there particular breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs or events that you do think about as having this kind of potential to be so transformative of human history that it would make everything after it a singularity?
So the term singularity can mean several different things. One is with reference to a specific event in the future of artificial intelligence, which is when the AI starts recursively self-improving, making itself a smarter and smarter AI, and does that successively faster and faster, so it just gets so smart that it just, whatever it does is going to be the fate of the world or even the fate of the galaxy, who knows. And so it's just that point is kind of the crucial turning event. The other way that I've seen the term used, though, is just a point in the future in which a technological and social change is happening so quickly that from our perspective here in 2015, we can't see through to the other side. We can't know what's going to happen next. And I do think there is some value to the sense of humility that that perspective imposes on us, that there are changes that could happen in the future such that we really can't think through what life is going to be like then. We're just going to have to get there and see what happens. You know, for comparison, I think the example you raised of looking at things from the perspective of people living in 1915 is a good one, because, man, imagine being alive in 1915 and trying to imagine the challenges and situations that we would face in 2015 right now, let alone in 1945. And so I think we do need a certain sense of humility. At the same time, though, as long as humanity exists in the same form that we do now, we haven't been uploaded into computers and so on, then the basics of life, we need friends and family and a good night's sleep and a few other things like that. That's probably all still going to be the
You
same.
just haven't tried the right drugs yet, apparently. The ones that are coming. I'm not saying the ones I take, but yeah.
Not switching gears a little bit. I think it's there is an interesting idea. Again, I'm biased. Kind of percolating its way through global consciousness right now that is a potential singularity on the social side, which is this idea of the Anthropocene, that humanity has gotten so large in its impacts that we've entered a new planetary epoch, a new geologic epoch, and that we're dealing with, we're changing the climate, we're changing many other Earth systems. I think if we really start to grapple with that and start to think about what that means in terms of how it might affect the way we think about things like geoengineering or limited nuclear wars or technological singularity, we might come out in some very different places than we are right now in 2015.
So we'll get to your response to this in a second, but just on the geoengineering question, it seems like our linear projections of climate change are one of the things that we can be most certain about, right? It's the ineluctable in certain ways, unless there's some runaway processes like methane clathrates that get released by the thawing of Arctic tundra that cause a runaway process, and it gets a lot worse a lot faster. But at any rate, it's going to get bad. We know it's going to get bad, and so do you project geoengineering as a technology? By the way, this means putting a bunch of dust in the atmosphere to try to cool the planet down, or putting a bunch of gunk in the ocean to try to suck carbon into the ocean, something like on that order.
There are a lot of ideas, and if you are a betting person, betting that it will be warmer on average in 2045 is a very safe bet, and that's why I do think that at least on a limited scale, intentional geoengineering will occur. We're already doing geoengineering. We just aren't doing it intentionally. Climate change itself is geoengineering. We've intervened in the nitrogen cycle in such a way that you could argue that it is geoengineering as well. I mean, half the nitrogen that's in all of our bodies was fixed from the atmosphere via industrial processes. That nitrogen would not have been available 100 years ago in 1915, and that means that about 4 billion of us would not have been available in 1915. That's the kind of geoengineering. That's the potential of geoengineering. So I think we will try it because climate change is going to get bad. I think the first application, if I was to bet, will be an attempt to mess with a hurricane. We've actually already done that in the 1950s. They tried cloud seeding to redirect a hurricane. Unfortunately, whether through their own fault or just natural processes, it redirected itself into Savannah, Georgia, and people didn't like that, so they stopped doing it. That said, cloud seeding continues in places like China and in the American West, even in the absence of good evidence that it works. So we have a strong inclination towards geoengineering if we think it will help us, and I think as extreme weather gets worse, we'll employ that technology.
Blockchain technology, is that?
Absolutely. So I think blockchain technology can arguably be posited as a singularity class technology because it is a model for decentralization, and that lands, we've had hierarchical models for organizing our human endeavor, but now with blockchains being decentralized, we can scale up much more dramatically the capability of our human endeavor, and particularly on planetary scale activities in nanotechnology, synthetic biology, and AI. And that's because blockchains are a system of checks and balances and simultaneously global local recording that we haven't had before. And so with blockchain technology, it's very transformative. We can do more than what we have been able to do before.
Blockchain technology.
Okay, just explain it in one minute.
So blockchain technology is the software protocol upon which cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin run, but it's more generally an organizing kind of protocol.
Okay.
It's being proposed as a potential to create a trustworthy internet where we would know who each other are and have, and yeah.
the next, it's an internet class, scale innovation.
And so you see this as a way for people to coordinate around the world
Yes,
in
in
a
a
way
much
that
larger
they,
scale of activity than we've been able to do before.
okay.
With trust.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to combine that sort of capability with what you were describing about this awareness of the Anthropocene. Oh, and this is, if there's one thing that has me optimistic, this might be it, because this sense that as a planet, as a whole species, that we're all in this together, that we can't just say, oh, it's US versus China versus whoever, that there are these issues that really need to be tackled, the whole planet altogether, otherwise we don't make it through, or at least we're going to go through some really rough turbulence along the way. If you take that and then the platforms to be able to do the coordination that our challenges require, then maybe, fingers crossed, we'll actually be able to get somewhere on this.
And the global catastrophic guy gives us an optimistic ending. So thank you so much.
We just need to avoid an asteroid, right?
Yeah, asteroids and bombs.
Solar flares.
Thank you.